Okay, I guess we'll get started. Everybody, thanks for coming. Yan Zhu is an independent curator, a critic of art and literature, a poet, and translator who currently lives in Toronto. If you follow her on Instagram, you'll know how sensitive she is to the beauty of the places she visits. She holds a Master of Museum Studies from the University of Toronto and is currently pursuing a PhD at the same school. Her research interests cover contemporary art, museology, cultural heritage studies, curating, cross-cultural art communications, and translation. Zhou is the curator of several high-profile international exhibitions such as Idiorhythmic, Canadian and Chinese artists, Urban Public Space Art Creation Project in Suzhou, China, 2016, Mediated Memory, a featured Canadian contemporary art exhibition at the 6th Beijing International Art Biennial, the National Art Museum of China in 2015, and Transformation of Canadian Landscape Art Inside and Outside of Beijing, a touring exhibition in Xi'an Art Museum, Xi'an. Yan has worked with many notable Canadian artists such as Susie Lake and Sarah Angelucci for the Lianzhou Photo Festival in 2017, as well as with Yvonne Lamerick and Ian Carr-Harris, Mark Lewis, and Michael Snow for other projects. Her exhibition, Through the Body, lens-based works by contemporary Chinese women artists, took place at the University of Toronto Arts Centre and was featured as a primary exhibition at the 2014 Scotiabank Contact Photography Festival. She is the recipient of Canada Council for the Arts Grants and an International Council of Museums Young Professional Fellowship. Her writings about art in books, articles, and reviews have been published in Canada, the United States, and China. Zhou will be talking about introducing Canadian contemporary art to China and some collaborative projects between the Canadian and Chinese art world she has been working on in recent years. So please welcome Yan Zhu.
Good afternoon. I hope I haven't used your lunchtime. It's my great pleasure and honor to be with you here today. Thank you, Robert, for kindly inviting me to speak at this great institution. I hope my talk won't make you feel too boring today. And today, I would like to talk on my experience of introducing Canadian contemporary art to China. And if we have a few minutes left, I would like also to talk on some collaborative projects between Canadian and Chinese art world I have been working on in recent years. The work of curating, as I understand, does not only include asking some meaningful questions to explore with artists and the audience, selecting artists and works of art, structuring an exhibition, cooperating with various constituents to make the exhibition work. But also, important and all these works involves creating an environment and providing sufficient support for audience to make meaning and have some unique experience. Curating is a translation. It means to translate some people's ideas and imaginations expressed in visual forms and other artistic forms into a kind of affordable art experience of the audience. Affordable means that the audience can approach the work of art and obtain personal experience with the support from the information providers. To quote from Oxford reference, affordance is a term coined in 1977 by the United States psychologist James Jerome Gibson to refer to a source of support provided by the environment to an organism, furnishing or affording the organism with an opportunity to act in a particular way. Cross-cultural art communication is essentially a translation which I think has double meanings, to translate between languages and translate the work of art into the affordable art experience. In my own experience, the curatorial work includes curatorial thematic research, organizing an exhibition, project management, programming and exhibition promotion, and here I mostly mean education, and other support to participating artists and institutions, as well as funding. Usually, in an institution, different departments and professionals work together to fulfill these functions. Well, in my case, when I work as an independent curator to organize Canadian exhibitions for Chinese institutions, usually I don't have a Canadian institution behind me. I work as an institution myself. Sometimes I work together with a co-curator, sometimes only me. Maybe I should go down. Yeah. Sorry. When I started to introduce Canadian art to China several years ago, most Chinese had no ideas about contemporary Canadian art. Since things have been improved in past few years, my first challenge then was what is the Canadian art and how can we introduce Canadian art to the other culture. It seemed to me ridiculous to try to define or even describe what is the Canadian art. But I guess we could show what Canadian artists have been doing, what topics they are addressing, and what kinds of art they are making. That is my first approach in the curatorial work. In the projects we will look at today, I will show how different art worlds, cultures, institutions, systems, and museum practice influence and condition the cross-cultures art projects. How could we reach local audience, and what lessons I have learned from these projects. So the first project I would like to talk is the transformation of Canadian landscape art, the inside and the outside of being. This project includes 15 Canadian artists and a contemporary dance group. So altogether there are 20 artists involved. The first project I would like to talk about is the transformation of Canadian landscape art, the inside and the outside of being. A large touring exhibition presented at the Xi'an Art Museum and Today Art Museum, Beijing in China, from August 2014 to March 2015. The exhibition was the largest and groundbreaking Canadian art exhibition to China in almost 3 decades. In 2013, when I went back to China to prepare for a Chinese women artist show at the UTEC, the current art museum of the University of Toronto, I visited Yang Chao, the director of Xi'an Art Museum. After less than half an hour's chat, he asked me to curate a contemporary Canadian art exhibition for his museum and gave me a scope of the project, 10 to 15 Canadian artists. He expected that the exhibition could help Chinese people have a sense what Canadian contemporary art looks like. Well, where should I start? The first thing I did was to ask people around in China, what do you know about Canadian art? Which Canadian artists you are familiar with? And the responses were, Canadian art? Isn't it the Impressionism landscape painting? Or Canadian artists, we know the group of 7, Alex Colville, Edward Bertinsky, and Jeff Ward. So I will give a little bit history review of Canadian art's presence in China at the time. In 1975, Canadian government organized an exhibition of the Group 7 to China. It was the first foreign art exhibition went to China since 1966. 1946, the year when the Cultural Revolution started. Dennis Reed was the curator. There was an episode a few months after I did the show in Xi'an Art Museum. I met Reed here in Toronto. He was curious about the show in China, but the most interesting thing he told me was whenever he went in Beijing, a queue of people would follow him as if he was a monkey. So 40 years ago, few Chinese had ever seen any foreigners in China. The Group of 7 expedition to China in 1975 had a profound influence in China. It inspired many people at that time and also shaped the Chinese imagination of Canada and Canadian art until the recent decade. Gu Xiong, a Vancouver-based Canadian Chinese artist, traveled from a remote village in Sichuan province to Beijing, about 2,000 kilometers in distance, to see the exhibition. It took him a week to go to Beijing. He reflected on the experience, quote, "The painting of the Group 7 looked so modern and so unconstrained, although the government thought these works were harmless, non-political, purely landscape art. I felt that these works were political. They looked revolutionary. They appeared as the symbols of freedom. Ironically, what was criticized here as the representation of the nationalism and the white supremacy in the Group of 7's paintings had radically different meanings when it was introduced to China. In 1985, Alex Colville's exhibition went to Beijing. That was a time when Chinese avant-garde art just appeared a few years, and the first wave democratic movement was fermented. Colville's work influenced not only many Chinese painters in terms of artistic style and techniques, but also spoke to the Tamilo's intellectual world. Sorry for my pronunciation. People found in his work, such as Horse and Train, Pistol and Man, the sense of an existentialism challenge. A poet wrote a poem for Colville's work in 1985, which he sent to me after learning that I was doing a Canadian art show in China. Edward Bertinsky has become very popular in China after he made several series of works about Chinese industrialization and modernization in the 1990s. The concept of manufactured landscape he conceived and his photography work have influenced generations of Chinese photography artists. Even now, he is still one of their favorite photography artists. Jeff Wall had been greatly admired since his presence in Shanghai Biennale in 2010. He is also a major influence in Chinese art world in the past decade. So after several months of initial research, I determined to do an exhibition about Canadian landscape art in order to connect the existing Chinese impressions of Canadian art, and through this radically debated theme to showcase what has changed about the concept of landscape art and what has been excluded and neglected in the discourse of landscape art in Canada. I also want to create a dialogue between the landscape art in Canada and the Shanshui Hua, the classical Chinese mountains and waters painting tradition, which is the dominant art form revered by the local people and art world in Xi'an. So let's go. It's fine. Okay. 1 minute. I clarified some ideas regarding the concept of landscape. First, landscape is a Western term and concept which was originated in Renaissance time and had gradually developed as both a genre of art and the representation of nature. Secondly, the concept of landscape in North America is different from that of Europe. W.H. Auden, a poet, described the difference in his essay Robert Frost and the vast wilderness of the North American compared to the culture. I think he meant European culture, vestiges buried in every inch of the soil of the Europe. And thirdly, I think we cannot simply use the stereotyped concept of landscape in the contemporary world. Neither can we successfully introduce this concept to other cultures without contextualizing it and bring it to an encounter with differences. I argue that the landscape cannot exist alone without consideration of the use of the land, the people who dwell on the land, and the culture and imagination that are rooted in the land and give it presence. Thus, a number of overlapping themes become apparent in the exhibition: the connection with and the departure from the Group of Seven and Canadian dominant landscape discourse tradition, media, technology, industrialization, and urbanization that have encroached life and landscape. Exploration of historical, culture, and political resonances of the genre from perspectives of the indigenous people and immigrants, cross-cultural communications, and the imaginations of land and landscape, and finally some internal imagined landscapes of a psychological nature and the meditations on our impact upon it. The exhibition was structured accordingly. It is not comprehensive, neither it is representative. Initially, Michael Snow proposed two other possible works for the project. I show the images of these two works here. Plus tard, 1977, which consists of 25 color photographs and plexiglass with paint wood frames, and Field, 1973 and 74, a work of black and white photographs. You could find the information about these two works by yourself, or I can send you later. These are very interesting works, but I don't think I have time to give a more detailed introduction. And these two works show Snow's early reflections on nature using photography as medium. I agreed with Snow that these two works fit the project. However, CN Art Museum couldn't satisfy the loan requirement of the National Gallery of Canada. Besides, the cost of the loan, shipping, and insurance made them unaffordable. So we give up on these two works and select three of Snow's films: La Héron Centrale, 1977, Condensation: A Cold Story, 2009, and In the Way, 2011. La Héron Centrale, 1971, is a 3-hour film shot in Quebec. I have always loved the epic film and felt it echoed Auden's reflections in his Hic quote. From the height of 10,000 feet, the earth appears to the human eye as it appears to the eye of camera. This is to say, all history is reduced to nature. Snow described the film. It is a film of completely open space. In other words, a landscape. It feels like a record of the last wilderness on Earth, a film to be taken into outer space as a souvenir of what nature once was. It will convey a feeling of absolute aloneness, a kind of goodbye to the earth, to Earth. It will preserve the wildness as well as alone as a rarity. Snow's work like this has lasting influence. The film Gravity, 2013, was inspired by this film. It's a memorable thing to show La Héron Centrale in CN Art Museum. Actually, it's the first time Snow's work had ever been presented in China. He had some fans in China as early as in the 1980s, but very few Chinese had ever seen or know anything about Michael Snow and his works. The museum screened the film in its theater for 40 days. After the first screening, curators, critics, and artists invited by the museum nationwide came to tell me, this is a real masterpiece. It is so powerful and so unique, surpassing all the other work in the exhibition in terms of grandness, freshness, and uniqueness. The other two works of Snow, In the Way and Condensation. This is a condensation. Is it good? Is it good? Okay. Condensation. It was done in, I think, in Newfoundland. Michael Snow spent summer every year there, and this one In the Way, a projection on the floor. I don't think I have much time to talk about them. I think conceptually, technically, and poetically, few contemporary Chinese artists have made anything about nature had approximated to these works of Snow. Maybe Zhong Hui's recent work, Qili and Wind, is close spiritually. I won't describe this work much, so if you have a curiosity, just write to me later. I will be happy to discuss with you. Influenced by Marshall McLuhan, Ian Baxter transformed the Canadian art scene through his innovative integration of media consumption, communication, lifestyles, and technology into art. Baxter is like a foreteller of what had been debated intensively in recent years, such as geoaesthetics, ecological art, infoscape, a term he coined, which means the world is an information landscape, and anthropocene thinking. We had his Eastern Landscape 2014, which consists of 10 recycled television set turned to snow, imposed on the snowing grace, acrylic painted landscape. Baxter painted over these recycled old TV sets in the storage room of the museum. We also include Rebecca Belmer's, you can see the one surveyor with vest, yellow vest, that's Rebecca Belmer's work. We also include Rebecca Belmer's performance-based video work of Perimeter 2013 in the exhibition. In the video, Belmer performed as an anonymous surveyor, drawing a plastic fluorescent flagging tape, walking barefoot across a First Nations reservation, then trespassing through private industrial mining property and into a town. The silent person wearing an axe on his or her back quietly draw a line through all these spaces. Belmer's corporeal involvement performance work has strong mesmerizing power and rich meanings. Most things we explored in this exhibition, such as the nature, landscape, land, paper, people, culture, industrialization, memory, and etc., were implicitly contained in the work. It is very political and very poetic. When the exhibition to Today Art Museum in Beijing next year, the ex-ambassador Guy Saint-Jacques hosted Canada in Conversation event featuring Rebecca Belmer and his museum. So this one. The event and the touring exhibition was Canada's official launch of the 2015 and 2016 years of Canada-China Cultural Exchange. Belmer gave a powerful speech denouncing the colonial history and the continued mistreatment of the First Nation people in Canada. The speech stunned everybody presented. I thought she gave a good culture and historical lesson to the Chinese art world and the media. I'd like to point out, when we were working on this exhibition, we found that few people in China were aware of the term and the concept of the First Nation and its related history and the current struggles, except the Canadian government and media. The art world and the society in China were totally ignorant of this important facet of Canadian history and contemporary reality. Realizing this, my team did research and spent much time on translating and interpreting the concept and this part of Canadian reality to Chinese society. Since this exhibition, I began to include some indigenous artists in almost every art project to China I curated consciously, but not every time I would succeed in finding right indigenous artists whose work and idea would fit the project. For example, I tried to find some indigenous and Inuit artists to participate in my project about air pollution in China and its global connections. For 2 years, I haven't found any because I think fit, the work, is a measurement. So here we had a Wonder Coop's brilliant orange screen. Excuse me for a moment. Wonder Coop's painting the lemon yellow hued one at the back. The work is one of her hybrid human series, which combines large-scale painting, projection video, and the contemporary dance work of Joanna Bayer and gear-shifting performance works. In classical Chinese art, calligraphy was revered at the pinnacle of all art forms. In Chinese Shenxue Hua, mountain and waters painting, calligraphy is what constitutes the basic brushwork, the composition, the inherent movement, and the flux of energy. The practice of dance and martial arts intricately interweaves in calligraphy and painting practice. The cooperation between Coop's large-size painting, almost like a huge backdrop of stage, and their shifting performance works dancing inspired me to create a cross-cultures performance in the museum. We invited a local calligrapher to write Li Bai's poem, Toast to the Wine, in cursive style, while watching their shifting performance works danced before Coop's painting. The experience is remarkable for everyone on site. Okay, Gu Xiong looked at the land and nature from the perspective of a Canadian Chinese artist and an immigrant. Invisible in the light is a huge installation made of tomatoes and pins, which covered a wall of 12 by 9 meters in the gallery. Gu used the tomatoes to construct a big Canadian map to represent Latin American migrant workers who labor on farmlands and in greenhouses in Canada, but their contribution to our society and their suffering are invisible. The installation of the work was completed with help from a dozen of volunteers. I could tell you, I think people were curious about Canadian art, and they had a lovely feeling toward the Canadian artists and art. At the time, I got more than 15 volunteers came to support the project and exhibition in CN. Many of them came nationwide everywhere, and some even went to CN from the States and the UK. The most challenging and difficult project in the exhibition are two off-site, site-specific installation works. When the exhibition was confirmed in November 2013, I started to plan an ambitious project. As late as the Tang Dynasty, there were Muslim neighborhood in Xi'an, and the Tang Dynasty is called Chang'an. At the present, there are more than 500,000 Muslims living in the city. Many have lived in the Muslim district and the downtown area of Xi'an for generations. There are thousands of street stores, restaurants, antique shops, and various markets, as well as the Great Moscow. This in Great Moscow garden photos. Built in Tang Dynasty, that's 742 year, and it is a UNESCO site. The Muslims in Xi'an kept their distinctive culture and lifestyles, live relatively independent but also in harmony with the rest population, deeply immersed in traditional art and antique worship. The Muslims are mostly outside and unaware of contemporary art. I want to engage the Muslim community in this exhibition, so I told the museum I want to do a site-specific work in the Great Moscow, and they need to make it happen. Then I invited Jamili Hassan to create a work there. The whole museum, from the director to the exhibition department staff, and also myself, used all possible resources, tried to reach the local government and the Moscow. From November 2013 to early May in 2014, there were no progress. The museum asked me to give up. I insisted. All efforts seemed failed. The museum sent several staff to the Moscow every day to meet the evasive head of the administrative office of the Moscow. It was already stupefying hot and humid there in May. The museum staff actually crouched at the gate of the Moscow for 2 weeks every day, and finally they caught the head who could make a decision, and they succeeded. So Hassan installed her hand-drawn Islamic calligraphic patterned poem Nur, or in English translation it's light poem in Quran, in the library of the Moscow. The work relinks the Islamic cultural communications along the Silk Road, connecting the places such as the Muslim district in Xi'an, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, because this pattern they installed in the Hagia Sophia mosque, and antique shop in Egypt. You can see there is a lantern hung there. That lantern was brought by Hassan in a shop in Egypt, in Cairo. The Great Moscow is full of ancient buildings, steles, antiques, classical Chinese paintings, and calligraphic works, and in many large gardens. Hassan's work is the first contemporary artwork, and the first foreign artist's work appeared there. It is installed in the library permanently. Ron Berner is a garden maker. He made beautiful gardens at the Hart House in the University of Toronto and at the London Museum. He's one of the earliest artists who explored the harm of industrialized agriculture since 1970s. He also traveled across the world to explore the Silk Route, following the transmission routes of plants across the continents to find the impacts of this transmission on history and cultures. Hassan's work traces the Silk Road across the land, while Berner's work draws the map of a connected world held together by the oceans. I thought this would be a perfect match. In the project, Xi'an was at one end of the Silk Road. The people have always been proud of this history. The departing spot of the Silk Road is only a few hundred meters outside of the Xi'an Art Museum, so I decided to include Berner in the project to raise the awareness for the Silk Road that was not on land but across waters. I told them that I wanted a public space for Bernard's garden, and their nightmares started. Even more difficult than persuading the Great Moscow to allow Hassan to do work. The museum was facing half a dozen bureaucratic government institutions to get permission for using a piece of public space for Bernard's garden. The whole process was only suffering. They hated me for this demand, but they tolerated me. Finally, a few weeks before the opening, the museum got a piece of land right outside of the museum. In the center of the main avenue stretching out from the big wild geese pagoda, the starting point of the Silk Road. There were much ado involved in the project. At the end, it failed. The garden looked nice. This is the opening day. It looked very beautiful. The garden looked nice for 3 days. Then all plants died. The public complained to the government, and the government blamed the museum. There were many reasons for the unfortunate work. First, the communication between the artist and curatorial team and the museum was not good. Cooperation was difficult. The artists didn't do sufficient research, in particular summer climate and soil conditions of Xi'an. Plants that grow in greenhouses cannot survive outside in August in Xi'an. Local bureaucratic system made the maintenance of the garden very difficult, and it was a site not quite fit for the garden. For a garden, there were no watering equipment. The museum staff had to carry buckets of water there to water the plants every day. Because they were hurt during the cooperation, they were reluctant to do the work after the artists left. Eventually, the museum replaced all the plants in the garden for 3 times to keep the work there, at my insistence that no work could be drawn from the exhibition before it closed. Reflecting on the case, I think I had the most part of the possibility. I should be more aware of the challenge in realizing this work, and probably I should not attempt at this ambitious project that no one actually could control. 2 months after the exhibition in Xi'an, the museum reached an agreement with Today Art Museum in Beijing to do the show there. The first thing, Today Art Museum actually is the first contemporary art museum in China. It has a theme that any contemporary artist has to do a show there, then you are really recognized. So it's a very important institution. 2 months after the show in Xi'an, the museum and the Today Art Museum reached agreement to tour the show to Beijing. The first thing Xi'an Art Museum required for me is to cut Hassan and Bernard from the touring show. Partly, I think it was because of the unpleasant experience with them, and partly, or I think most importantly, for the practical reasons. I mention this part because it's really about curatorial, practical, factual issues. Every exhibition everyone could go to China need to face. There would be no possibilities for them to do another site-specific work in Beijing. Today, Art Museum only had 1/3 of the project estimated budget. I refused to cut artists. Finally, I reached an agreement with 2 museums that Hassan and Bernard would make new relating works. They would not be site-specific and would not involve any international shipment. I had to explain here. China has a very strict art exhibition import and export regulations. Aside from routine censorship, each institution had to report to the customers, and several layers of cultural, administrative, and other government offices to get the permission for the exhibition and importing and exporting works. The institution also need to deposit 17% of work value at the customers until the work is cleared from the customers. So the whole procedure and paperwork is tedious and humiliating. The Art Museum had already reported all imported exhibiting works through half years difficult work, so they just wouldn't do it again. And today Art Museum refused to do it just for one artist's work. So that's an unlucky condition Hassan and Bernard had to face and to accept. They accepted, but they brought in works that need to ship back to Canada later. After the exhibition, there were disputes between artists, curators, and institutions regarding shipping back Hassan's work. This is really unlucky. For artists, it's really unfair because they really sacrifice and contribute. They are senior artists, they brought the works. It's lots of work and cost, but there's some condition that museum and artists just cannot reach a satisfying agreement. The worst thing happened before the touring show opened in Beijing. Today Art Museum did not have a curator, so they assigned the exhibition department to cooperate with me and the Art Museum. The head of the department was a lady with a background in childhood education. When the cooperation started, she demanded to be the curator of the exhibition. I said, you could work as a museum curator with me, but not the curator of this exhibition. She wanted to dissect my exhibition. I compromised if she agreed to keep the coherence of the thematic structure of the exhibition. I would help her to make necessary changes to make the exhibition fit for the museum. And then she told me she would cut five of my artists. That means 1/3 of the exhibition participating artists, and didn't provide any reasonable reasons. So I refused, and she insisted. For over a month, the Canadian Embassy in Beijing, the director of Today Art Museum, the CM Art Museum, tried to persuade her, but it wouldn't work. She seemed to have some superpower. People tried to persuade me then to accept that, but I thought it was unfair to these 5 artists, and the exhibition would be seriously harmed. So I determined either she gave up or I would quit. So I told all the artists my decision, called for their support, but I also told them they could stand aside, and if I had to quit, they should continue to do the show. Most artists came out openly to support me. Some artists kept silent, and some artists went to support the head of the department. Among 15 artists and 5 dancers, I got 17 supporters. Because of the name, I won. No artist was cut. There was some awkwardness of that fight, but our team worked professionally with the museum, and the exhibition in Beijing was held successfully. As you can see here, the tour show attracted nationwide attention. Overall, the exhibition was ambitious, experimental, and challenging. Engaging with the local audience was successful. We organized 7 programs. These are all the programs, workshops, talks, and education things, and a field trip and 3 talks in Beijing. Media, this is a field trip. We went to Tang Dynasty poet Wang Wei's the place he lived for most of his later life. We went to a vineyard, and we went to artists and architecture buildings. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we lost the microphone.
Yeah. Oh.
No.
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry, could just remind me. Can you hear me? Oh, I know, I'm too short. So sorry. So media coverage was prevalent for weeks. The news of the exhibition covered major search platforms for a dozen pages. The acceptance of the exhibition and Canadian art was great. Years later, people I have never met before would come to me and to talk about the exhibition. And because of this touring show, I was recommended by Canadian Embassy to the Beijing Art Biennale to curate a featured Canadian art exhibition in 2015. Excuse me. Let me see. How long I still have?
10 minutes.
2 minutes?
10 more minutes.
So I should just go over very quickly. So this is a 10 Canadian artists group show in a National Art Museum of China. This group show actually, this is a huge biennale. 1960 countries participated in it, and there were over 2 million visitors went to see the show. And 10 Canadian artists we brought there. 5 of them it's the first time for them to be there, including Pierre Doring and Carl Vigneault. I think it's important to show their work there. And we also did the second Canada in Conversation talk at the embassy, and we invited one of the most important curators in contemporary Chinese art world to do a talk with curators and artists, so to promote the exhibition. But I won't go too much about this. And now I want to talk with you about Idioramic project. So this is a public space project I did in 2016. And the picture there is quite famous. I forgot the architect's name, but I could send you later. It's a quite famous building. It's a cultural center in New Suzhou. Suzhou is an ancient city with many beautiful classical gardens, but the new city is an industrialized technology center. So this is a cultural center, and I had the opportunity to do a show in the public space. So I will briefly read the context of it. So I was invited by a Toronto-based artist to do a show in Suzhou because one of the artist's friend is a businessman and has a cultural merchandise company. They want to do a show to raise the profile of the company, and the businessman has some relationship with the local government. So that's the background. And when the artist reached me to invite me, I was sort of excited because at the time I was concerned about the urbanization, the using of the public space by the citizens in China. I was curious how local people make use of these really vast, you can see vast spaces developed recently in China, and what's the relationship between people in these spaces. I was inspired by Roland Barthes' book, How to Live Together, novelistic simulations of some everyday space. So that's how the title comes from, Idiorami, which means a productive form of living together in which one recognizes and respect the individual rhymes of the other. So you are together, but you have your own rhyme, your own space. But you need to find the space to being together. So that's the idea. And from this, I invited 9 Canadian artists and plus the artist who invited me to do the show. And they will go to China to create works and also create some public programs in a really, it's a really, as a design, it's a really interactive, participatory plan. And for myself, it's really exciting. It's an ideal project for me. The artist proposed beautiful plans, so I will show you two examples. One is Ivona Lamrich and Ian Carr Harris. They got inspiration from the most beautiful Chinese memoir, Secret Records of Floating Life, written in Qing Dynasty. It's a very beautiful love story memoir. And they designed a pavilion with reflective surface to be installed by the Taihu Lake. And then Ian Baxter, he used the mirrors, reflective mirrors, to do work in 1970s and 1980s. So it's many years experience. And for this project, he would develop a new series of his mirror reflection works and invite local people to participate in this project by taking selfies with the mirror and the cell phone. But this project didn't work out. I found it's not like what I was told. And it's a project I regret to accept, because the businessman actually, he was interested in my resources. He didn't care about how this project will be. And the artist who involved me later want to take on the curatorial role. So I found that I couldn't really function as a curator. I asked to quit in August. But the artist told me it's too late. If I quit, I betrayed them. I should stay. So I stayed in a difficult situation. And then the work, they did the work in Suzhou, and there were no participating activities. All these kind of designs, programs work hard. No contemporary art world professionals went there, no media, contemporary art media. So they did work, they had a great experience, but actually nobody in contemporary art world in China knew anything about me. So seeing this, I found it's a big pity. So I talked to a Canadian guy who ran a gallery in Shanghai, and asked him to do a temporary show for these artists in Shanghai. So we did a show in Shanghai. We could invite art world people in Shanghai to attend the show, and it's great. So I just pass many details here. But one thing I want to add is, for myself, it's not a good experience, because my curatorial plan, I think 60% or 70% was not really realized. I felt pity. But for artists, they appreciate this experience, because Suzhou is very beautiful, and their cultural and their experience with people were wonderful, and they did the work there. So for them, they're still very grateful for the experience. So here I will briefly show you some images of the other works. This is the Sara Angelucci, the photography artist. You should know. Last December, I did 2 solo shows. Sara Angelucci and Susie Lake in Lianzhou Photography Festival. This is actually the first time Lianzhou Photography Festival invited a Canadian curator, introduce important Canadian artists to their festival. Lianzhou Photography Festival is one of the most important photography and media festival in the world, and definitely the best and the largest in Asia area. They were very excited with these 2 artists' works, and put lots of money in the production. But the Suzy Lake's show was censored. Just a few hours before the opening, we got at 2 or 3 o'clock at night, I got a message that Suzy's show would be closed, and the reason is they felt his old lady's works made these officials feel pessimistic. So you could see that there's lots of interesting things happened. So the festival tried to protect it. They hung a fixed log onto the door. Can you see here? So originally it was a fixed door there. We could tell people, go in, have a look. So we dragged people in the first 2 days, and when there was a lock. But the government found it out, so they changed it to a real lock. And it was locked for 2 weeks. We felt very sad. So curator friend who was going to curate a very large, high-profile photography show in Nanjing, it's just opened last week, and told me he could take Suzi's work there. So with the support from Suzi, from the Lianzhou Photography Festival, from a curator, other Chinese artists, and this Nanjing Fine Art Academy Art Museum, we brought Suzi's show to a new venue. And people loved it. Dozens of artists sent me photos of her works at the opening day. So I'm happy, and I think people there were happy. And then there's a report about Suzi's censorship in China, in Canadian art. If you Google Suzi Lake censored in China, you would find it. It's a very beautiful article.
I'm just curious, how come it's still China?
Yeah.
So how come her stuff wasn't censored on this show, but censored?
Yeah, I think this is an art museum show, and I think Ministry of Culture they have different strategy. If it's an art festival, Biennale, they would be more nervous. There would be some more harsh and stricter censorship. But if it's just an art museum, they think that okay, it's just a gallery or museum show. Your audience will be mostly locally, but for Biennale and the festival, that would be internationally and many international media involved. So the censorship is just different. And a week after Suzi Lake's show was censored in Lianzhou, one of my artist friends from French attended Shenzhen, Hong Kong Architecture Biennale. He was not only censored, he was arrested, beaten, and his mural paintings were painted over. So it's just different. I think my time is almost there, but I will show you a few images. This is one ongoing project between Canadian and Chinese artists about smog, air pollution, capitalism, globalization, and political suppression. So Canadian artists went to China, and they work with Chinese artists together in studios, and did field research and create works. Also Chinese artists create their work. So you can see this work actually look like a Song Dynasty landscape painting, but they made of all data of the index of the pollution, air pollution. And this is a classical Chinese garden drawings. So there will be models, and there will be it's kind of reflects the living the daily life. So your spiritually and your real life. And this is another project. There's Michael Snow. Was really happy that his work went to China. And once he told me his favorite one is wavelets, and he would be happy that wavelets could be shown in China. So I thought about it and I got the idea. I invited artists, international, Canadian, South Korean, China. They create new work as a response to the wavelets, like a dialogue. And then we will show this new work. I was curious how people can still react. What they still can get from this film done in 1969, and especially for younger generations. So 10 artists work on this project 3 years. We almost done. Yeah. So I will just show you this. Is that my time up here? Or you want to see a short 2 minutes video?
I think the time is up.
Okay,
Sorry.
so that's it. Do you welcome for the questions? I think my talk is not so much about art. It's mostly reflect on my experience as a curator. How from my position, my role, how I work with artists and institutions to make things happen and work in China.
Is there any quick question? Go ahead, Brandon.
You have like a really difficult job. Like it seems that there's like a lot of obstacles that get in your way. Like especially because you're dealing with artists and you're working with these huge themes, and then you're working with like an entire country or two entire countries. So, what would your ideal show kind of look like? Like your ideal situation as a curator?
Well, I really like independent curator work because I think there are two important things in the world. One is curiosity, one is responsibility. Curiosity is, as an institutional curator, you have strong support, you have, the greater facilities, you have money, you have people, but you are also limited. Maybe you don't have that much freedom to explore anything you want to explore. As an independent curator, mostly I could explore things I'm curious with together with artists. So I think that's a great benefit. And also it's about responsibility. You have responsibility for artists, for the audience, and for me, because my background was from museum studies, so audience society is very, very important for me. For some curators, they think their idea theory or artists are more important. So curators are different. But for me, I think artists and exploration and society is equally important. So I think there's a responsibility. As an independent curator, you have an opportunity to really try these things. I think that's a good thing. But just there's really too much pressure with people, with institutions. I didn't mention money. Actually, as an independent curator, I raise money, I donate money into a project, and I did. So it's a lot of things, and also very difficult relating to China is the political pressure, and it's getting harder and harder to do things. But it's become more and more important, because that's the only contemporary art, especially in China. It's like all art forms, like it replaces literature, it replaces film, replaces music. So it's most important expression for the conscious, intellectual, and society, and just general society. So I think the more the political pressures pressing, you can see the stronger resistance, and I think that's amazing. So there's some attractives, but I don't know how long I can still work in this way, because as an individual, I think I'm really lucky. The first project, I went to see the director, and I never knew him. He never knew me, and he gave me this opportunity. When I did the show, I was just graduated, and no artist, like Robert, like Michael Snow. I look at their work like this. It's never imagined I could curate their works, bring their works to China. It's just like mystery. But I had good luck. I think I had great support from Canadian art world and artists, curators, professionals. But ideally, I think if you want more, you ask what is the ideal role. I hope there will be more consciousness, awareness from Canadian art world and society, more institutions, more people, professionals involved to encourage communication, not only with China. There's rarely any communication with the broad Asian, mostly we are still focused on North America and Europe. You rarely see any work. I saw more Latin American work in China, and every time I went back China, I only stayed for 2 weeks or 1 month. I saw so many works from everywhere, but here very limited. So I think the whole society needs to get together. Communication needs to be both ways. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to mention the catalogs you have here? Are they for people to look at?
Yes, you can have a look of the catalogs. Anybody else have a question?
Do your exhibitions get reviewed in China?
Oh, yeah. I think, I think the first one, the landscape one, is very, very important even now, because it's really changed the idea about Canadian art and about landscape. And it's not only about landscape art in China, also entirely about the landscape this idea. Because in China, landscape art, just like the Group 7, we also said 大好河山, like the mountains and the rivers are beautiful because it represents the nationalism, the China. And people never reflect on that. And there's either 大好河山 or classical paintings, and not really thinking about that, what nature means for you. I think this is this big expression. It's like pierced through surface. So people start to think, what is landscape? What is nature? What's involved in this? So I think that expression is still very important, and people still talk to me. And I want to show you this one. Today Art Museum show, I don't think it really effective, because although it sounds great, it's in National Art Museum, so many visitors, but this is the official show, and the Chinese government, anything official in Chinese contemporary artwork means an enemy of real contemporary Chinese artwork, because the Chinese government suppressed contemporary art. So contemporary artwork actually, they won't go to the National Art Museum. So how did I do? We arranged events with a real curator. So, and we have lots of media, thousands of media. And then I hired an art history student from McGill and instruct her how to write reviews for each artist in Chinese. So she did a thorough research of each artist, used monthlies, and wrote very good articles. And then we published these articles about each artist in Chinese social media. That's a very effective way to introduce who this artist is, what's his or her art career, and what's her work. So it's not really real work in the gallery. The real work attracted attention from local people. We see ordinary people who are not art world people. But art world people learn about this exhibition than these artists from social media. Yeah, and this project is really a regret for me. I think I only show 2 artists' works here, but 10 artists' work. I need to mention in all my projects. You heard a lot, this great masters' names, but in every of my project, they are almost always half very famous senior artists, half young emerging artists. And in all my projects, I treat them equally. There's only work speak. So I didn't show this work because I want to talk about the curatorial things. So, but if you want to know, I will send you later. So it's a regret, I think, a very interesting topic about public space, social space through intervention of contemporary art, how this will work. Well, it's not really realized, so it's a regret for me. And I wonder, we talk about whether we should do, something like a mock-up show or model shows in here to showcase each artist's models and give opportunity for them to talk about their works and their design. That's amazing. But I didn't have time to work on it, so maybe in future, I don't know. And I hope in the future, Lianzhou Photography Festival, I need to mention, if anybody is working with photography, new media, if you have interest, you can contact with me, because there are several photography festivals in China, and curators that are interested in introducing Canadian young artists. So if you feel comfort, you have work you want to show me, just write to me. And the two other projects, I think in future I should have more opportunity to talk with you guys or the society, because we are still working on this. And it's these two projects. The first one about SMART, about political expression, is both aesthetically, conceptually, and politically. It's very strong and closely interlaced. So, and it's very complicated, the process and idea, and it's evolving around what is happening. Like the Beijing, last November, Beijing evicted 1.5 million migrant workers in 2 or 3 days. They just drove out, their house were just demolished. So our project also respond to what is happening in the society as well. But conceptually, we also want to think. You don't just live on yell at to the government or eat or earn money, do job. You also have quiet hour, reflect, watch movie, or read a book. So we want to see the individual's life as united with everything in it, spiritual, practical things. And wavelength is a purely conceptual work, I think. Yeah. Still have any question?
I think if anybody wants to contact Yan directly, you can get her email address from her.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Yan, for coming today.
Thank you.